everyone. Okay, recording in progress. I hope you had a nice time and a nice discussion. Allow me to invite your rapporteurs. So I need 4 people here, 1 from each group, prepared to give a 5-minute presentation on what things you discuss. And if you have slides, you don't have slides, that's good. No, but if you want it, you can. Okay, I see there's online. Yes, yes, of course, we have the online group. Would you like to? Okay, perfect. All right, so we have Juliana, good. Right. Okay, good. So, okay, so I think we can start now. And if we can project the online people for Miguel, if you can help us with that. And so we can start with that. But maybe while we do that, why don't we start with Ruskin over there, right? Is this one working? Thank you.
I come over there, I just sit there.
As you wish.
Yeah. So the great thing about being here is I can see absolutely nothing because of all the glare, which is a good metaphor for what's going on, right? So oh, okay. So who I can't see anyone. So if you're in group 2, wave your hands around. Yay! So we came up with 3, I think we said 3 recommendations with multiple subparts, of course. So first was around policy and legal. So no brainer here, but come up with an orchestrated strategy to really come up with a long list of everything you could be working on, prioritizing it. We thought really kind of 2 different sub-strategies there. One is really focusing on the national level, the institutions that are licensing the large constellations so far, primarily the US and UK at the moment, really working with the regulators, really pursuing a smart legal strategy, including lawsuits and such as needed, and then really supporting them in developing the international policy and framework. The second aspect of policy and legal was really focused on the handful of states who, from an astronomical perspective, have the most to lose because they have the largest investments in infrastructure, the Chiles, the South Africas, and probably other groups out there that I'm not as familiar with, and really supporting their foreign ministries to be effective advocates for the type of damages and sort of protections that are needed. I'll pause there if there's anything to add from the rest of the group on the first strategy, Chris in particular. No. Okay, I'll keep going. The second was really about broadening the tent. Really bringing in the wildlife, the environment, the human health aspects, really being able to clearly quantify what's lost, particularly from astronomical perspective. What's the value of these assets? What's the value of the lost science every year? And kind of taking, I think, a little bit of a playbook from what we heard from the industry yesterday. They're really good on what their talking points are, and they're really consistent about those. So any astronomer who's interviewed about the great discovery or the finding always repeating, what's at risk? Yeah, we took this fabulous image, but this is what's going on. This is what's at risk. Looking at simulations, maybe there's a fabulous sci-fi movie that will come up about the Kessler effect and what that means for society, looking at influences, and then really humanizing this story. Connie was commenting that it took her 7 extra years to complete her PhD because of a little squirrel, but they had to permit a telescope before it went through. So what about the poor PhD student whose whole 7 years was wasted because the streaks come off and is now desolate on the street because they couldn't get a job? Like, let's make it real. Let's make it tangible at the same time. And the third was really when Joe Biden calls and says, hey, Connie, what do you want? I'm ready to carry some legislation. Have to be prepared to answer that specifically. It can't be, well, let us study that some more. Oh, we might have some things we haven't thought about. We have to get comfortable with being clear. Yeah, here's what we want. Here's why we want it. And we're going to hold you accountable to it. And then the last piece, I'm just going to repeat what David had said from earlier. I think it's time to maybe not get as mad as hell, but get really, really clear about what is at risk here and what's at loss, and trying to make this a whole of government approach. It's not just at risk for the astronomy community. We have to make that a whole of government approach. So thank you.
Right. Thanks for that. I see Megan there online. Megan, I understand you're the rapporteur, so you can unmute and go take it ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, so we had quite an interesting discussion. One of the first points that was made was that scientists need to work faster. We've been having meetings and discussions about this sort of thing for a few years now, and it was pointed out that the same discussions are happening now as happened at the first SATCOM meeting. Meantime, the satellite companies are still launching things, and not much is changing from our perspective, other than that there's just more of this stuff out there. So we talked about working on at least 3 different fronts. So dealing with the media, dealing with the public, and dealing with the politics. And to influence the politics, you need to get the public on side. So the ways you can do that, public awareness is not where it should be about this issue. It's difficult to form compelling narratives, though, when you're talking about astronomy, because it's something that not everybody cares about, not everybody thinks is worth, protecting, and arguably fair enough. But there have been some recent media successes. So they were very interested just this week in both the light pollution story and the FCC story, and the LOFAR paper itself, a little bit further in the past now, but that got good coverage as well. So we were talking about other things that we can learn from some of the successes of the environmental movement. Some of those messages have become very, very powerful in the public and in the media. And there may be things that we can learn from those narratives, again, like the previous speaker said as well. And then it was pointed out that there's still quite a lot of things. There's an awful lot of effort going on to observe these satellites and figure out what the impacts are on specific instruments, specific telescopes, specific parts of the spectrum. But there's still an awful lot we don't know about the impact satellites are going to have across wider parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we need to have more in the way of coordinated observation campaigns to fill the gaps in the knowledge that we have there, again, to help us build that wider narrative as well. And then I think one of the final points that came up was that a lot of the discussions that we're having are based around a particular set of assumptions from a particular cultural perspective. I think the first day, a lot of that stuff was really valuable, especially for people who weren't necessarily so aware of the Indigenous perspectives on these things. So there's definitely a need for us as a community of scientists to self-reflect on our own attitudes and assumptions, and how those feed into the narratives that we're pushing to the public and the media, and how that feeds into the political discussions as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Robert.
I don't think so. That's a really good summary, and I actually welcome some of the frank points that were being made at the end there about how this resonates or not, and how we speak. Being careful in the way we speak for people, I think, as well, was a really good message. So yeah, no, it was a really good and lively and well-focused and small discussion. So thank you, everybody. And thanks, Megan.
I can invite now Juliana. Can you say the number of your group? And
Okay. Yes, so I think we discussed 3 main points that are awareness, regulations, and negotiation. So awareness, I think we've seen also in the previous 2 groups, is probably something that we all agree is important to show the public what we are losing, what is at stake. Astronomy is just not a general science that show us the beauty of the universe, but is also important in our lives. And we need to make sure that the public knows what is going on, what we are losing, and understand the importance of astronomical activities and what is at risk here. Of course, by the time we will be able to promote the value of astronomy and the understanding of astronomy to the general public, it may be too late for us. And so in the meantime, we need to use regulation to slow down at least what activities that may be interfering with dark and quiet skies. And so regulations may be more or less radical. We discussed the opportunity of how useful could be taking more radical actions, like, for example, bringing companies eventually to court. There could be several reasons why you bring cases to court. It could be environmental reason, it could be light pollution. We need to identify together how the regulation that we already have can be used in that way. And but it's like one of the first steps to start slowing down, while in the meantime, in parallel, we make sure that the public is aware of the issues at stake. And third thing is negotiation. So negotiations both at the administrative level, especially for understanding, like working at the country level for lobbying and getting more fundings. All of these activities, awareness activities may be beautiful, but we cannot do anything if we don't get actual fundings to support the promotion of these sort of outreach activities. And so lobbying at the national level for fundings, regulations is very important, but also negotiations with companies. Being a good actor can be a market value for private companies. So it's important also for us to recognize that we can actually talk as a community with private companies and understand how to find a balance between two competing interests in the use of the dark and white skies. So, okay, I'm done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, son?
So we worked with group one to come up with a couple of different ideas of where we can go forward with this. And I think, you know, as astronomers and space scientists, we are the experts in the usage of space, and that gives us a lot of power, both as local advocates, as international advocates, and as scientists. As local advocates, you know, as an American, I'll use the example of the FCC. FCC is a spectrum management entity, not a satellite regulatory company. They sort of fell into satellite regulations, but because they're not the expert space, they rely on us to give them advice on what to do. And when we let our voices be heard, they moved rather quickly in order to make these changes. And we have all these great new pathways forward with the FCC going now in the satellite industry in the US, which has been great. And that sets the precedent for future companies and for other people around the world to look at. And so we need to start applying more pressure to our local regulatory bodies, let our voices be heard, and let them know that, hey, we are the experts in space. You need to listen to our opinions. On the international scale, you know, it's great if the US does one thing or if Great Britain does one thing, but we need international cooperation. Space is an international issue. It's an intersectional issue. There are a lot of people who've got skin in the game and people who want to have skin in the game. And so as scientists, as astronomers, we can be the international advocates. We can let bodies like UN COPIUS have the advice they need, give them the things they need to advocate for our needs and for the needs of other people around the world. It's going to be a much longer and harder process than it is at the local level, but it's a necessary process because we can't just ignore the international aspects of this issue, which means that as scientists, we actually have a really, really good position here where we can conduct studies on things like orbital loads, on atmospheric effects of launches and reentries, on aggregate effects, on the effects on science and the cost of the science that's going to be affected by the number of satellites going up in space, the environmental effects on usage of the moon and other bodies in the solar system. That's stuff that we know how to study, and that's stuff we've been studying really, really well. And so by continuing those efforts and using our built powers as scientists, we can give these bodies the information they need to make meaningful regulations and meaningful rules.
Thank you very much. Now, our last group who actually prepared slides. So, well done. Take it away, Lisa. Bye.
Here we go. We were group 4, so we decided we would be a little clever to start with. I'm already hearing a lot of patterns, I think, across our various groups. So ours is going to be maybe going to a little bit of detail about some of the coalition building ideas that have already been brought to the table. We discussed, over the course of our conversation, we discussed a little bit about the idea of creating new thresholds for safety, but also kind of leveraging some analogies, right, that might help perhaps increase the urgency for establishing those thresholds and communicating them. For example, we came up with this idea of seatbelts for satellites. Seatbelts are a relatively new requirement in automobiles, but that's because automobiles used to be smaller, slower, and there were fewer of them. So we actually are at an interesting analogous position right now when it comes to satellites as well. But there's this pretty major material shift happening in those technologies and the numbers that are up there. Of course, we had our engineer in the group who made sure we wanted to make sure we were very clear that these have to be grounded in watertight technical standards for compliance. We also discussed, in many ways, the necessity of bringing space into broader environmental and explicitly environmentalist discourse. And in doing so, really working on building a broader coalition of both experts and kind of everyday citizens, right? So we have a lot of in-reach happening here within our astronomical communities, but what more could be done if dark and quiet skies got combined with debris discussions, right? If this became a much broader coalition, because all of these are ultimately issues about the space environment, about space environmental protection. So by engaging communities from orbital debris management, security, and others, perhaps we could forge a coalition with greater power than just ourselves alone. I'm speaking as a kind of astronomer, but okay. I've been enjoying interloping here this week. Let's see. Right. So leveraging this combined authority of a coalition to comment on broader issues related to use of space and space threats. And of course, again, not just in-reach, but sustained outreach. And this is where the cultural change part comes in, right? You can't put a Band-Aid on something. In order to build the kind of groundswell that's necessary to gain popular support for a cause like this, for a specialist cause like this, you need to build popular support as well. And that requires a sustained outreach that leads to a culture change, right? Which is obviously, that sounds like a homogenizing term, but like we saw last night at the Star Party, right? There were Ben, I think, talked to some educators there who like the school children of La Palma are all very aware, right, that dark skies are important, and they understand it at a very deep level. Granted, this is a very specific kind of place, but what if that kind of approach at early ages, and I believe Jessica probably would have something to say about this as well in terms of curriculum, right? What are ways to really kind of promote this among multiple different communities to kind of demonstrate the ways that the priorities that astronomers have relate to many different communities, different ages, different places. Together, right, I think that by broadening specialist coalitions we discussed, but also non-specialist coalitions with non-specialist communities, this is really going to be crucial to actually being able to build sustained change. I can stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all, really, because this was all of you, right? So big applause for everyone. Really, thank you. Thank you all. I invite you to leave now. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Wonderful job. Thank you very much. And the one thing I want to say is that only the group who did the presentation, they can share it, but the rest, please share that with us through the Slack. Your messages, please share it. All right, and now Bonnie is going to do the closing ceremony.
I was saying, notes. Okay, everybody. Oh, we're coming to the closing ceremony here. It feels like I just started talking with you just a day ago. It's been 5 days. Okay, so we have a few things here I'd like to go over with you, and if we could go to the next. Oh, I have this link. Here I am. Let's go back. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some high-level notes. Well, I'm not going to talk to you, actually. It's going to be the chairs of the 4 different types of sessions that we had that are going to come up here and talk to you about high-level notes from each of the sessions. And let's see how much they agree with the kind of things we just talked about with you, okay? And then I would like to go in over a few thank yous. And then there is a mention of a post-conference survey, and we'll have the URL, and we'll also put it in the Slack for you to give your opinion on how things went. And then we'll go over a couple of slides that I've met with the editors, that like most of them are here actually. So we met and talked about the proceedings that are going to come out of this. And it's voluntary to put an article in there, but we all are encouraging everybody here to do so. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about what it takes to do that. So, okay, so if we could have the community, Jessica, are you here? Okay. And I think it might be nice to have you all stay on stage after you talk.
So just so you know, I wasn't informed until a few seconds ago that I was supposed to be coming up here. And what's on screen, I wrote at like 12:30 this morning. So we'll see if it makes any sense because I don't remember what I wrote. But you can see what I wrote. I'll have to turn around if I want to read it. So maybe I won't even read that. I'll just talk to you. So yeah, just synopsis, the community engagement hub. Our goal in this conference was just really trying to bring in different perspectives to broaden the conversation fuller, more broadly beyond just the professional astronomers and the satellite operators, and to really, understand, different aspects of this issue from different lenses like environmental history, science and technology studies. We heard earlier this week from traditional indigenous knowledge keepers on the importance of the ongoing and continued relationship with the night sky and the cosmos in their communities, and the importance of maintaining the dark and quiet skies for their connections to that. And we also heard from them different ideas from what we often typically think about with the human sky relationship in Western astronomy, and just thinking about it in different ways, thinking about different ways to engage in relationships with other people, with the night sky, with the outer space environment. So what we really hope you took away from this was just thinking about things, different perspectives, and then also looking forward to how we can continue to build relationships with communities that have come here, and also just going forward, broadening to interact with even more communities and perspectives and relationships and building that forward. So I look forward to your continued interest in the Community Engagement Hub. We'll have a meeting, as I mentioned before, next month. So if you're interested in further engaging in these CE Hub meetings and discussions, make sure you join CPS and express interest in the CE Hub so you get on our email notification list and on Slack, and you can participate in the conversation further. So thank you.
Next, we're going to have Siegfried come up and tell us a little bit about the Sat Hub sessions.
Thank you very much, Connie. So first, before I start, to give you a quick summary of the setup sessions, I would like to say a very, very big thank you to my co-chairs, Meredith Rawls and Mike Peel, without whose amazing help this would not have happened. Also, thank you for the entire CPS management, all the hub leads. I think you've really created an amazing conference. I've had so many interesting conversations with subject matter experts. And this is pretty much why we came here, to hear from a lot of subject matter experts with different backgrounds on the challenges that we are facing due to satellite constellations interfering with astronomy. And it's such a broad field. I think we hopefully gave you a quick overview of how diverse even the interference with astronomy community is. We had radio astronomy, who was really, really, a very strong set of speakers that were convincing us that radio astronomy interference is something that we really have to deal with. It is something that is very, very powerful. Fortunately, with the ITU, there's a little bit more of regulation there than maybe in the optical, but still there's a lot of work to be done in order to get this under control. Optical astronomy, I think we had these beautiful graphs that are actually pretty scary of what Blue Walker 3 does to the CCDs of the Rubin Observatory. We have complete whiteouts of entire little tracts there. So that I found really, really disturbing, actually. We had a lot of other really interesting optical perspectives. We had folks there from laser ranging who were discussing artificial guide star issues, right? And that was something that is actually the inverse problem, where satellites are actually protected from ground-based astronomy, but that them not sort of opting out also causes additional delays, and a lot of other really, really interesting subjects. Spectroscopy, we had some aspects there, foremost, especially where it also seems that there is sort of a sweet spot where astronomy can still do their work, right? But there's other ranges like these medium, I would say, range or medium resolution spectroscopy, where we have really, really big concerns of what the satellites are doing. Space-based observatories are also affected. So, sending a telescope to space only helps if you send it really, really far away, which means you can't service it properly. And it comes with a lot of other challenges. And even like things like X-ray astronomy and amateur communities are all affected by this to one degree or another. Next slide, please. No, I have to click here. But what's much more important is that this conference has shown us that there are avenues to mitigation strategies that astronomers themselves can pursue. So in radio astronomy, we had really excellent suggestions of how coexistence is possible if we can convince operators to just play a little bit with their radio beams if that's possible. We had ideas of how to analyze these unwanted emissions, unexpected emissions, and how to hopefully shield spacecraft in the future from those. We had a lot of interesting aspects of how we can deal with optical astronomy interference, be it through software, be it through better understanding of how bright the satellites are if we look at them from different angles. I think we also had some leeway with spectroscopy, where if we add additional basically visual observation capabilities and machine learning, we can mitigate some of the effects there. Space-based observatories, again, there are some interesting software solutions there, like Star Unlink. And last but not least, I think we found that if we can group everybody together, everybody who's working on this subject, come together in one place, talk to each other, that includes industry, we can find solutions to this problem, hopefully much quicker than we would if we would just go for regulation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have next is the policy group, and Rich is going to come up and give you the spiel on the summary for the policy group.
So Andy and I had a goal, which was a combination of trying to get your collective wisdom on the products that are going to help address Ruskin's issue when the US president calls Connie, is she ready to give that information? And how is progress on policy being otherwise made in partners and elsewhere? So we celebrate some success. We heard today that despite the fact that the procedural goal was not met in COPUOS, look at all these nations now aware of the problem and in favor of it. Look at the statement from the G7 ministers. Look at ESSI going on in the UK. And so progress is being made on this awareness front, but we have to keep that up, looking outward at official level. We are trying to engage a growing number of people because, as you heard from our working groups, we may want to devise an international framework, but ultimately it's all our national governments that are going to do this job. And so the working group consists of people of national and regional astronomical societies and influential in their national advice to their governments, and we want to keep expanding that network. So we had two stories. What is the hub itself actually doing, and how can we polish off this phase? So Josh told us about the position paper. And in a shameless plug, if you can stand coming back here rather than going to the beach at the end of the break, we want to work on some of the getting your input into the content of this message. That is the message of the IAU on the impact and the mitigations that are going to be required. You heard from Aaron's group in the morning about the analysis of the legal and policy basis, both internationally and nationally, and that will be a superb reference for our later promoting as a professional society the real mitigations we actually want to propose into a regulatory framework. We heard from Adrian that there's going to be a dark and quiet skies module for the space sustainability rating. This is going to be a superb self-motivating metric for industry best practices. And so having that inclusion is going to be exceedingly valuable. I told you briefly about how we're trying to consolidate all those technical recommendations so that we have another document based on our UN-sponsored conferences and our NSF-sponsored conferences that says, yes, here are if you engineers want to know what our technical requirements are, here they are. And we're grateful to Lorena for stimulating us to consider that the IAU ought to get active in a big hurry about protecting astronomy from the moon. Next slide, please. Or I can, maybe I have it, sorry. Yes, no. There we go. Okay, so then we heard from various nations about what's going on and how they're making some real progress. And you heard that in the intermediate term, that's going to be our mechanism to make sure that protection of astronomy is a condition of licensing and is high awareness in national governments. So you heard Ashley, the FCC is making it a condition of licensing as a regular practice, all on their own. Plans are underway. We heard from Nadia for an independent constellation, and it has as one of its priorities that it has to minimize the impact. The ESA Clean Space Program includes dark and quiet skies. We heard explicitly that there's a German space strategy, so that we are reaching the agencies that are actually responsible for these things, and that's the approach we want. And we heard from Pedro that in Chile, there's going to be a strong environmental aspect to dark skies and to satellite constellation licensing. And that's the connection we've all been thinking about in the longer term. Astrocarta and ESSI in the UK have strong elements of dark and quiet skies protection. We heard from Farjana that it's complicated in South Asia in that the strong emerging space powers like China and India have yet to consider the importance of engaging the emerging space powers that are their neighbors. And the general message is that we just have to keep up in order to see policy and ultimately a regulatory framework. We have to interact with policymakers and industry just continuously to expand this awareness. So I think that was the outcome of the policy group.
And now we'll have Federico Di Bruno come up. Federico's around to speak for Tim Stevenson, who is one of the two co-chairs for the Industry and Technology Subcommittee or group. All
right, filling in here, so bear with me. But well, we saw what the presentation from Industry and Technology is. We need to take into account that Industry and Technology Hub is a little bit different than the other hubs we deal with. It's a bit more closed, and they're working really hard to try to increase the number of members they have, right? So we heard from Tim on his introduction on what are the constraints and how industry is working on that. Then we heard from Patricia Cooper about the general industry view and how the INT is working on that, the plans that the INT have. I think the one thing we really need to get going in the CPS is the Technical Advisory Committee in the Industry and Technology Hub, which will be a close group of companies that will meet under the CPS to discuss dark and quiet skies, and it will be in the CPS, right? So we really need to get that. Then we heard from David Goldman from SpaceX, and he was mostly focusing on the mitigations for optical astronomy. And I know that there were lots of questions also about radio, and unfortunately we didn't get them, but there was the commitment to also answer those questions, and luckily we do have good connections with the spectrum management group in SpaceX, so we can still have these conversations. And in the Q&A, there were some very good questions, and I think also our time for Q&A went a little bit short. But we talked about relationships with the regulators, the market limits and limitations in numbers, and how to support independent research. So thank you.
So I have a few different gratitudes to convey. And the first, again, that's why I strategically placed this slide here, because all these wonderful people are up here. And also their counterparts or cohorts in crime are also to be celebrated. So sorry, you hadn't seen that one before. Anyway, okay, so I wanted to very much thank Jessica, and John was a silent partner, but he was very instrumental as well. And of course, Meredith couldn't be here, but she was just as instrumental in many ways with Siegfried and Mike in the hub sessions. And of course, Richard and Andy are both here in the policy. And then Tim was here solo, but he has cohorts in crime. You met Patricia, and there's Chris Hofer from Amazon. And I just want to give them a big round of applause, please. Anyways, so I also wanted to give thanks to, and I don't know if Antonia is here. Is she here? Okay, I'll stand in for her until she gets out here, but to the local organizing committee, because you can see how much detail, there she is, come on up, please. You can see just how much detail they put into everything, how much thought and dedication, and every single aspect, at least from my humble opinion, was just outstanding. So I want her to say a few words, and then I'd like to also give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everybody. I have a few words in English. I only wanted to thanks your participation in this symposium. It's very important for us to host this meeting. It's well known that in the last decades we have been fighting against the great threat to the night sky, that is light pollution, a fact that the astronomer denounced it for first time onward of the progressive loss of this natural resource for science, for technology development, but also for environment, biodiversity, for the associated cultural heritage to the stars as an engine or driver of sustainable economy through star stories. This conception of the sky as a natural, cultural, and landscape resource and for local socio-economic development emerges from the Declaration of La Palma in defense of the dark sky and the right to the starlight, which led to the Starlight Initiative signed by UNESCO, United Nations World Tourist Organization, and the International Astronomical Union, among other institutions, and an action promoted by the Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias in 2007. Since then, the Starlight Foundation and its international certification system has been created to promote and carry out actions for the development and management of the principles of our Carta Magna, Letter Magna, including the establishment of strict regulations in defense of the dark sky in accredited areas and the promotion of astrotourists, creating the first global public and private astrotourist network of the world. Proud of this initiative, every year, every 20 April, we celebrate our anniversary with a blackout in all starlight sites, a blackout like that night, which has speeded up with a musical composition created expressed for the first International Starlight Conference. The aim is not only to convince politicians, but also to raise awareness in society. Together with other organizations such as Dark Sky Association, we protect the so-called Dark Sky Oasis, defined in the first workshop of Dark and Quiet Sky for Science and Society. As those areas that have a high commitment with the protection of the sky and promote policies and strategies for its care and conservation, and also promoting assurances. New threats, as we all know, treating the night sky, artificial light at night, radio frequencies, and the growing deployment of satellite constellations are increasing rapidly. All this has an adverse impact on astronomical observation, professional and amateur, limiting scientific discoveries, cultural connections to the night sky, and opportunities for astronomies. During this week, we have the honor and satisfaction of hosting this symposium where professionals and experts like you from all over the world has exposed you from different perspectives the risk, many of them still unsuspected, of the improper, inappropriate, and abusive use of the mega constellation satellite. This is why this fruitful meeting should result in resolutions to foster mitigation strategies, policies, and regulatory measures to be implemented in local and national governments. And finally, also taking into account that the sky is related to the Sustainable Development Goals in the area of poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, peace, and justice, a revision of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals has been proposed to add quality of the sky and access to starlight as a new Sustainable Development Goal, number 18. And a public petition has been created to promote the inclusion of the preservation of the skies in the 2030 agenda. The proposal was signed in the Parliament of the Canary Islands and has been promoted by the Starlight Foundation and the Association of Business and Professional Women of Spain, which is part of a global network of more than 500,000 women from 5 continents and has consultative status of the United States and the European Council. This new Sustainable Development Goal was presented in March 2022 and is the only one new Sustainable Development Goal already registered, which doesn't mean accepted, obviously. And this year, we have also presented it in New York at the United Nations Commission of the Status of the Women. More than 2,500 people and institutions from more than 20 countries have supported it. Organizations such as the Cabildo of Tenerife and the Cabildo of La Palma, among others. And we have a network of the Sky Sustainable Development Goal ambassadors. On this island, we plan to hold next year in 2024, the first International Forum of Women for Nature, and this naturally includes the sky. I invite you to join us to all levels, scientific institutions, companies, or individuals, and to support us in the fight through the website created for this purpose. And finally, I conclude saying that we are all made of stardust. Literally and culturally, astronomy is the oldest science and helps drive scientific and technological discoveries. Having access to that sky is necessary for many livelihoods and cultures. The starry sky is an opportunity for development and empowerment of many indigenous and local communities in rural locations. Then it's our duty to protect and safeguard it for present and future generations. Thank you, Senator.
So, okay, you see all these people on this list. It's amazing. And there's a lot more probably that we had forgotten. But I want to make quite clear that the IAC people were amazing in helping us coordinate all this, and the Starlight Foundation people, which I'm not going to be able to name everybody. But I also want to name the CodeBrain crew out there, and they're right behind you. And also Miguel, who's on the other side of the wall, who's like the Wizard of Oz. You don't see him, but you know, he's done all this magic. And so I'd like to give them a round of applause, please. And of course, I'd like to also mention Maria and Nicholas. And I would like to also, because everything's piling up here, so this is why I'm doing this right now. Actually, here. We wanted to give you a special thanks.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, no, my God. Organization, we consider. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And the last thanks is to all of you, because you know, you've heard this a lot by now, but we're not silos. We're not silos. We have to work together to actually make this all come to pass. If we have this dream, and we only can accomplish it if we do it together, all the different stakeholders, not just astronomers. So for you guys, you are the pathway forward. What you produce is the pathway forward. And I hope we stick together somehow and work together in the future, and that we come together again, maybe in 2 years, to have another symposia. Okay, so I hope you'll all join us then. And so this is you. Please forgive me because we could not get the online people, but you're going to get the picture of the online people, this one and the other one we took indoors with the online people in the near future. We'll have that for you. Okay, so just a couple more things, if you don't mind. We like to know from you how well we did our job. Okay, and so if you could please go online to this address, we'll put it on the Slack in the general directory, I think, the general channel. Yes, and you'll be able to take that survey. It just takes you less than 5 minutes or so. So it'll be very, very fruitful for us because we want to do a better job next time even. So now the pièce de résistance. Did I say that well enough? Natalie. Okay, so we have the proceedings that's going to come out of all of this. And of course, it is a voluntary thing for you to be able to write something for it, but we'd like you all to. And so here to talk about the proceedings, a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the proceedings, is Peter Grimley, who's going to be one of our 4 editors and probably the point of contact.
Thank you, Connie. Yes, as Connie has said, it's customary for the IAU to produce a volume of proceedings after a symposium. And to do that, we need an editorial board. So those are the names of my colleagues on the editorial board. Diane has been joining us online, but David and Martin are both here. So you can ask them some questions as well, if you like. So just a few pointers about what is involved in producing the proceedings, if I can get this to work. Yeah. As Connie has pointed out, that I've underlined the word invited there because we are inviting you to each presenter to provide a written contribution to the publication of the proceedings, reflecting the presentation that you've given. Please don't be tempted to include new material. I'm sure you wouldn't. We have to comply with a publication process which is provided by the IAU and which is dependent on the publishers, Cambridge University Press. And that includes the format of the written contributions, and it's quite specific. Now, for those of you who are familiar with LaTeX or LaTeX, depending on how you want to pronounce it, that shouldn't be too difficult. But we do recognize that the use of a LaTeX template may be unfamiliar for many people who've presented. So the editors will be able to provide some assistance and advice in using LaTeX. Now, we've had to set page limits because we're given an overall limit to the size of the publication. So we've identified 3 types of paper to include in the proceedings. Keynote paper will be limited to 12 pages. A contributed paper, and that's most of you, will be 8 pages. And a short paper reflecting the poster presentations will be 2 pages. Now, obviously, there's not very much information here on the slide. So our intention is to provide further information from us as editors by the end of the day on Wednesday, the 11th of October, which will also include advice about copyright provisions, which I know is something that will concern many of you. And you'll notice that having listened to a great deal about the connections between international law and national law, that when we say the end of the day on Wednesday, the 11th of October, it is obviously down to
local national regulations to determine when that actually occurs. The due date for the articles to be presented to us will be Wednesday, the 8th of November. Now, that's only 4 weeks away, and we recognize that's quite a tight deadline, but it will help us enormously in producing the proceedings if you can adhere to this deadline. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Okay.
All right, everybody. I think this is the end. Ha ha ha. But we're going to have actually more sessions for the the hackathon, excuse me. And we're going to have, let's see, a session that's for the UN delegates that a few people are going to. So, and then anything else happen in your session, the policy session too. So the policy session will be in here. Okay. And the hackathon is still at the museo, I guess, if you'd like to join in there. And that's about it. Yeah, 4:20. So now is the break until 4:20. So be where you want to be at 4:20, please. Thank you.
Problems as well as the slightly out of band radiation problems. And we need to find a regulatory home for that. And we need to talk about aggregate limits. It's a real challenge. That okay, that's a nice general statement. We all want to couple this to international environmental law and believe that it is. And we support the broader community need for space sustainability in terms of responsible space traffic management so that we minimize the production of space debris. You want to scroll just a little bit more, Mike? Yeah. So do you believe that that set of open bullets captures the technical needs of what we are really looking for? That that it's reflected sunlight, it's protection of radio quiet zones in every respect, it's coupling to international environmental law and long-term sustainability practices. Have we captured that goal, the set of goals? Go ahead, Ruskin. And there are mics somewhere, or you can shout. We have folks online, so I think we really do need to get a mic. Somebody watching online.
So Ruskin Hartley with Dark Sky. So Richard, you'll probably have no surprise kind of some of my comments here. And I think particularly in light of the first discussions with the community engagement group, this is great for astronomy, and I'll let the technical astronomers figure out whether these are the right technical limits. I would just encourage us to put some language in here that acknowledges that these technical limits for astronomy don't encompass the full suite of environmental impacts over the life cycle of a mission from construction through launch, et cetera, and that we encourage both at the international level and the national level that all of the applicable environmental laws and other standards and regulations are applied. I just think it's really important that you create the space, particularly to align with the Community Engagement Hub. Thanks.
No, that's a very good suggestion, because we certainly, I mean, we can demonstrate there's an astronomical impact on space traffic management, but if we want to couple to environmental regulation in some fashion, then recognizing that, I think, is very important. So thank you. Yeah, Ruhi.
Sorry, Ruhi Bilal, Princeton. I was wondering what the facilitating a fast turnaround of satellite generations means in the last bullet point.
If that's unclear, then we clearly need to reword it. I think the intention is deorbiting as rapidly as possible. So it's to minimize the population in transit on the way down. Okay, she'll give, I promise she'll get back to you. We're gonna give you a workout. Yeah, Juliana.
I think, I don't know if this is the right moment to do it, but I would review some of the wordings around the Outer Space Treaty, like space sustainability laws. I'm not sure we have space sustainability laws. We have soft law instruments. We don't have laws, I believe, or elaborating conventions of the Outer Space Treaty. I'm not sure what that refers to. So I think we have to review a little bit the wording when like what I see is things related to the Outer Space Treaty or environmental law, space sustainability, then maybe the wording of other things works, but that needs to be changed a little bit in my perspective.
That's great. Thank you. And so we will announce an opening of this document for actual addition of comments to it. And so at that point, if you'd be so kind as to look at that and clean up those phrases, that would be a great help.
Richard, so it's Peter Grimley. I'm actually along similar lines. I wonder if some of the language could be nuanced a little bit. If we could go to the very beginning of that section, please. Right at the top. Yeah. I mean, CPS encourages states. Can we not say something like urges? You know, it's encourages sounds a bit sort of limp. And then I thought the next thing that struck me was encourages the international community to preserve and improve. Well, which do you want? Do you want it to be preserved, as in stay the same, or do you want it to be improved? I don't think it. You know, it's about being a bit more punchy with the language around indicating what one wants, and ditto going further down where it says something about consideration of international law. We don't want consideration of law. We want someone to tell us what it means, or to decide that that is how it is to be interpreted. So again, it's a similar point that, you know, these rather apparently minor aspects of the language can have, I think, quite a big difference on the way it's read. You know, I think that's the important thing. One has to put oneself in the shoes of the person reading it, and how are they going to react to that? Sorry, I've gone on a bit.
No, that's very good. And so, I mean, I have to say, my eyes shoot up at that first sentence, because we're asking to preserve the quality of the night sky today and anticipating, you know, a factor of 10 increase in the number of satellites. That's a pretty big ask. So, but indeed, we should be clear about exactly what we are asking for.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Rui has a follow-up.
So I wanted to agree with, I don't think the improve should necessarily be there. I don't know what is necessarily meant by improving the dark and quiet skies, when right now we're just fighting to preserve what we have, as you said. And I think it might come across as sort of asking for more than just preservation. But I wanted to go back to the rapid facilitating, like the rapid turnaround to the next generation. Like,
yes.
Given what we've heard about the potential for atmospheric pollution from deorbiting satellites, like, is that necessarily something we want to endorse there?
That's a very good point. I think it's the wrong goal, right? What we want is the straightforward mechanism of rapid deorbiting under control, right? I mean, that's what we really want. So that's a very good point about that one. We do have a question online.
From me, you don't have to have video this time, I hope. Richard, it's Robert Massey. Yeah, I was just thinking actually, and partly in response to Ruskin's point about when there is that line about thinking about environmental concerns, it seems almost set against this to put this in a single clause in this against the rest of it, which, you know, are essentially around astronomical concerns and so on, whether or not that's adequate. And also, I then think, if we're going to do that in the context of the conversation about deorbiting and so on, and some of the, you know, admittedly early days concerns about material re-entering the atmosphere, just how we square those things. You know, I'm just thinking through who we should be talking to, maybe to finesse those. And perhaps, you know, I mean, with the greatest respect, I don't know the expertise of everybody in the room, or let alone online, but, you know, I'm just wondering where we should be going, or whether we should be seeking external comments to help us with that.
Good question. We have, you know, good talent here, but whose comments might you suggest that we run this by?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of thinking, you know, this is a group of astronomers talking to their peers mostly, and I know there are people from advocacy groups and so on and elsewhere, but what about talking to environmental scientists and so on who've done some of this, and just seeing if that work accords with, or the phraseology accords with what they'd recognize in similar endeavors.
Okay. All right. I think that's a fine idea, and we may propagate this outward in phases as well, because we may ask some sympathetic policymakers to look at this language and say, does this make sense to you? And we may get a very different reading as well, just like Ruhi caught the, you know, do we want to encourage throwaway technology? Well, no, you know, we want responsible orbital management, so we have to be careful about how we phrase things. So that's a good suggestion. Shall we look at the next section where CPS recommends do this? Require an impact assessment? Is that what we, are those 4 bullets what we want to know about a mission prior to their getting permission to launch and operate? Yes.
This is where you would have consulted the folks from the Siegfried's group and asked them, is this what is required? Is this what's best? Because I don't think we're the experts on this, on that particular section.
Right. I mean, I might look at the first bullet and say, we want more than just an analysis. We'd like to show an analysis that demonstrates they're actually faint enough, but, you know, but the general topics, and that's fair. And I'll note that we've shared this with Siegfried's group. So, okay. But again, are we asking for the right things more generally rather than just technically? And is this the realization that we want? In other words, many national environmental regulations require some kind of impact assessment. And so is this the kind of context that makes sense for what we're recommending basically as national licensing procedures?
I'll sound like a broken record again, but I think it's strategically, it's a discussion about whether the focus here is about you're going to make more progress more quickly if you focus on astronomy, or you always focus it on the broader suite of environmental impacts, including astronomy. So like which strategically brings progress most rapidly? And again, the risk of solving it for astronomy and leaving everyone else behind is a real risk here. And again, I don't have the answer to that. I know this is an astronomically focused group, but it's like that's a strategy, right? Do you want to broaden it at the start and bring people in, or do you want to focus it narrowly? Or yes, and?
So I think one way I've been reacting to that very good comment is that in all of these, we need to leave a door open saying, for the benefit of astronomy, this is what the impacts we need to see assessed along with any other broader impacts, so that we have a bullet that just says we're aware that there are broader implications. And if you ask for an impact statement, you're likely to want to know other impacts, not just ours. So it may be that that's the way we balance our focusing on what does astronomy need versus the general question of our fitting into this broader infrastructure. Okay. So Lisa and then Ruby.
Lisa Ruth Rand, Caltech. I think I wanted to pick up on what Ruskin was alluding to, and also, again, be the historian in the room and say that perhaps it might make sense to. So as we're talking about this, as we're talking about ways of bringing a kind of environmental, potentially, environmental research and politics to this, I'm thinking about the 2011 US NRC paper that posited that orbitals that LEO had basically already reached a tipping point, which is a term straight out of the climate change playbook, right? This was 2011. So we already have a bit of a precedent set. So I guess my recommendation maybe that would help with some of this would be to provide a framing beyond kind of where we are right now, perhaps giving a little bit more context might provide a platform to make these recommendations that is maybe a little bit more inclusive of other forms of expertise as well.
It's a fantastic suggestion, and it echoes what Ashley pushes us on all the time, which is, we really, really need to say, this many streaks is too many streaks on the basis of this kind of impact on our science. And we're in the mode, sorry, my short-term memory has failed, but one of our wonderful presenters said, we have to do both things at once. We have to move out on influencing policy right now, and we have to do these more detailed studies so that we can ultimately back that up with real scientific evidence. But we've got to move now. So we can make a general contextual statement. We as scientists would love to make that detailed, say, that we're already over that edge, and another doubling of streaks is going to put this much science out of business. We can't yet. We've got to, and so we've got to state something general and there is a lot of document before this, and so it'd be great for you to look at it and see if we've set up that case. Ruby.
I was just going to make one suggestion. Would it be worth adding the potential for on-orbit tests of the reflectivity and radio emissions and unintentional electronic noise, like in the licensing require that at least the first set of satellites that's licensed, after it's launched, there be some tests on orbit, and then the results of that are considered for the next set of launches.
So if I processed what you said, higher up, we say, it has to be a, say for, let's pick sunlight reflectance as an example, that you have to have a modeled prediction and then a validation on orbit so that, there's a feedback loop. I mean, that's what Goldie said they're doing, but we want to enshrine that into actual regulation, that everybody's models get validated rather than just licensing on a claim and then letting them go. So it's a very important point. We'll have to see if we need to repeat that concept explicitly down here, but we make it earlier in the document, and you're absolutely right. Online, you said?
No.
No. Oh, okay. Okay, shall we go to, believe it or not, our industry hub readers said, this is such a polite document. Aren't you asking governments for money to actually make some progress on this? So we've put in some asks in this next upper bullet. So maybe we can scroll down just a little. Yeah, okay. So we've heard whole of government often. And we're not going to get around the fact that most governments are supporting commercial space big time in terms of both actual money invested and loosening all kinds of regulatory approaches to let them get up there faster. And so we're living in that reality. And the question is, what do we want the governments to do about it? And one thing they can do is send money. So that's what one of our networks calls fair and balanced, right? Send money to astronomy and make sure that in some way or another, it's advantageous for industry to make their operations better as well. But rather than, that makes sense. Rather than urging a grants program for industry, they could just, cut their taxes yet more or something if they do a little R&D. I mean, in some sense, if we're going to policymakers, we don't want to tell them how to do their craft. We say, this is what we need, and let them figure out a program to actually make it happen. So that's why that kind of odd wording on the industry part. Okay. And the last inspirational bullet, you're okay with that? We really need to keep this strong balance, right? Where, David and Ruskin would have us get a little bit feisty and push them to compliance through, and at the same time, we want to collaborate. And so how do we strike that balance where we're going to be tough and we need to collaborate with you? And we need to do both, is the short answer.
In terms of, let's see, stakeholders, it's not just collaboration with astronomy, it's with the space traffic management, the space debris community, the SSA community, as well as probably other communities that are, affected by this. So maybe with astronomy and to explore the effect of coexistence, something along that.
Interesting. Okay. Elisa.
I was thinking along the same lines, but I was also thinking that one of the things that stood out to me yesterday in the industry panel was a lot of discussion about how much good Starlink is doing. It kind of was this very kind of clear narrative of this is a public good. This is a wonderful thing that we're doing for people who don't have access, right? What are we doing? Can we take a similar tack, right? What are these efforts doing to protect dark and quiet skies for people beyond astronomical communities?
I see what you mean. Yeah. So what are the broader benefits?
Exactly. What public goods are we all contributing by doing this to show relevance beyond, again, not just in reach, but outreach?
Okay. So we need another bullet with a door open there to show that broader benefit and broader collaboration.
Just in addition to what Lisa just mentioned, I think we should also add the necessity to raise more awareness, not only within the science or between astronomers and industry, but also within the general public.
And so to pursue that, how do we put this in as a recommendation to policymakers? We need to do that for sure. Do we need more support to do that?
I believe so, yeah. And like to maybe develop some government action on that, like not necessarily policy, but to facilitate this general public awareness about the potential impact. And again, to raise awareness about how astronomical science is important, and beyond that, how dark sky in general important for the society.
Okay, so that could well be a second request for support. That okay,
funding it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ruskin again. So I think in this, I'd encourage us to be bold and ask for what we want first, because it will then be watered down through process of negotiation. I mean, I'm sure that's what most people, so like, let's be clear about what we want. Obviously not so unrealistic that we want, this whole thing to be shut down, but be as clear as we possibly can. I was also struck by the graphs that Pedro shared, and this gets more complicated, right? But the interplay by ground-based and space-based light pollution, and the private sector loves private markets. So if they want to pollute more of the sky and increase the natural background level, maybe they should be paying for mitigations on the ground. So we didn't see table 1, so I don't know whether that includes anything in terms of the cumulative impact on night sky brightness, but kind of I think introducing that concept that the IAU has been on record for 30 years, as that's a limit to professional astronomy, how that's already under threat, and that's adding to this. And therefore, if we're going to do more of this, we need to figure out how to do less of that down there.
Yeah. And we need to make sure that there's at least a coupling with the space traffic management and the threat of debris brightening the night sky. So before we go to you, Yaswant, we have a couple of online comments. So we will do that.
Do you want me to go first? Okay, I'll go first then. I was just going to respond to the speaker before, Ruskin, and agreeing. And I think actually one of the things that strikes me is that, well, it's been talked about throughout, but, the need to bring the public with us. I think that's got good political resonance in many ways. There's that comment, isn't there, that attributed to Mario Cuomo, the idea you campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose. Astronomers are brilliant at governing in prose, I would suggest, and not always so good at the first bit. I mean, we're better than some scientific disciplines, it's fair to say. But, that idea of the cultural resonance of this, the fact that it's in the Western cultural canon as well as the global one. It's a global thing, right? This isn't just indigenous communities. We all have connections through poetry, art, literature, and so on that resonate in that way. And I wonder if we're missing a trick by at least not alluding to that a bit more, rather than just diving straight into the presenting them with an equation to manage satellite magnitudes down to 7 or below. And it's just a thought, really. I'm not entirely sure how you'd necessarily do that, but it seems like perhaps in the preamble, perhaps in the points about preserving human culture, it should be in there somewhere.
That's a very good point. I mean, I assert that it's in the broader text, but maybe we should have some of that preamble about value before we ask for what we're asking for. So, yeah. And go ahead. Who's the next comment? Ashley, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Yeah, just one quick comment that I think it is good to think about how requests might change depending on what happens at COPUS. If eventually an expert group is established, and how the interface might go back and forth. So that's something just to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm considering. This is written more in the sense of a completely general framework rather than one aimed at the UN. You're right, if there were an expert group, they may come up with a completely different set. This is sort of the distillation of the 4 workshops saying, to date, this is the best kind of information we've been able to produce, and you're already using it, as you said. It was interesting today to hear that Mila gave low probability to the actual formation of an expert group, but your point is still there. You never know. And so if we get some forward progress not being made by CPS on setting technical standards, then we need to leave open that possibility. But do you think, Ashley, that it would be adequate to say, look, here was the position that was developed on the basis of the community meetings we've had to date?
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
So again, we need to think in Lisa's spirit as well, how we frame this so that it's clear that, it's always a balance, right? We don't want industry telling us, yeah, and then you're going to move the goalposts again. So we need to say that, this is sort of a well-defined need that maybe we find some, but that, this is a set of technical policy level needs that we are likely to retain. Okay, so Yaswant, and then
yeah. So
Chris?
I was on the point above. I know we passed it a little while ago. I should have commented earlier, but it's not just on the technical side. It's not just a whole of government approach to supporting development. It's supporting astronomical observatories to develop and test, operate, mitigation. But it's a whole of science approach. We need material scientists to study various coatings that could be used in satellites, aerospace engineers to develop better satellite designs. It's electrical engineers to figure out ways to tampen down on background noise and radiation coming from the electronics on satellites. And so I think we need wider support at academic institutions as well to figure out the best ways to mitigate the effects of satellite constellations.
So do you think, in terms of how we structure bullets, that we should leave another one of these open doors, saying base? Go ahead. Okay.
Maybe it's because it's the end of a long day at the end of a long conference. So I'll put out an idea. Feel free to reject it. It won't hurt my feelings. But we hear over and over that this contention, this argument that if regulation is overly burdensome and restricts the commercial sector, well, the commercial sector is just going to leave that jurisdiction and go reincorporate elsewhere and send all their employees to a different, more permissive, laissez-faire jurisdiction. I believe in almost all senses this to be a canard, an illusory threat. I don't know, and that's my personal feeling. I don't know if there's something about what I just said that can be incorporated into this, maybe certainly on that strong language, but something along the lines of states should assess the extent to which regulatory overreach and freezing regulation substantially threatens development and investment in the mega constellation industry.
Call their bluff in a bullet. Yeah, my son was an avid role-playing game fan, and when his kingdom would get threatened, one of his options was to reply, "We reject your idle threats." So it's fine when they say that. If they want the U.S. market, they have to submit to the terms of U.S. licensing, and so where they conduct their launch business might be at issue, but not this. So but the threat they do have is that they say, look, you ingrates, we've spent all this engineering money to make stuff dark. You're never satisfied, and so we don't call them, you're on our do not call list. And so, the real threat they have is to cease cooperating. The regulatory burden is just posturing. I completely agree. And if they're still listening, well, we still agree.
So Richard, just a comment on moving the goalposts, because I think you probably do have to address this and say, like, astronomy is an evolving science and there are some clear goals and but from the other side, the industry has got near to magnitude 7 and then they removed the visors, and they got near to magnitude 7 and then they doubled the size. So like there's a lot of goalposts moving going on here. So again, I think this is an opportunity to put forward what we want and what we need. Given the limits that we know, and be clear about that, and not feel like we have to kowtow and we might be moving the goalposts. No, let's be clear.
I agree with you, but I think I sort of react the other way as well. I think that the LSST folks have been working pretty hard, and they've got a bigger tolerance. In other words, 7th magnitude's a little softer than they originally feared, but I don't want to move the goalpost that direction either, because, you know, there are other science projects that showed that they actually do saturate their CCDs at 7th magnitude, and so they like that limit. So, you know, I think once we put down a numerical marker, even if it moves around a little bit on the basis of further technological information, it isn't good policy to move that around particularly. Now, there are other pieces like radio, you know, where it's complicated, like radio, where, you know, we need to start developing real understanding of aggregate limits on electronic noise and things like that, you know, and that we may get an early result that then does move. And so, you know, I mean, this is a policy problem that, you know, even in my fantasy world, I don't know how you do it, right? What we can do as astronomers is to say that for a sensitive observation from a ground-based observatory, we need the following aggregate limits on noise at this frequency, that we can, you know, that we can do that. How you then, as a policymaker, say, okay, we anticipate that there are going to be 31,200 satellites at full build out that radiate this much total power, and therefore the limit on their out of band is X. It's no wonder the ITU doesn't want to touch that. And so, you know, we have technical challenges, but I think in the first instance, we, you know, I reflect back, Ruskin, we have to tell them what we need on the astronomy side, and then just live through the storm as they throw up their hands and say, how do we do this? So, are there any other thoughts on this summary? I will push you all to open this document when we're all awake again, and we'll open it up for some commenting or some, you know, some way of reading it and sending us comments, because, you know, this has been incredibly useful just to polish up this bit of it. And you can now imagine how many hours that Josh and Andy and I have spent already assimilating some comments, because it's worth this kind of discussion for all of this. So, any last thoughts on this one? And I'm going to keep us trying to use our tired brains and put Adrian on the spot a little bit to say, you saw his presentation about their initial steps to devise in the end a sort of one digit, you know, a single number metric for compliance with dark and quiet skies issues. When you looked at that, do you have any thoughts for, you know, how would you do it? How, you know, forgetting weighting factors, what kind of information would, if you were devising this metric, would you want, and how might, you know, how might you treat the kind of inputs that the satellite constellation operators are going to provide? For example, you know, would it be sufficient for them, for both our regulatory thinking and his rating, to say, here's our total reflection model that we derived from pretty valid data. So here's what our visibility looks like as a function of solar phase. Here's how many glints we make. Here's how often we flare. I mean, is that the kind of information that should be sufficient for him to then give them a rating on how good they are? Or, you know, we're trying to tune up his process so that we astronomers would say, yes, you know, we really see this as a valid metric for good performance. Ruskin, please.
So I think that the rating is really interesting, and it's a great approach. And I'm drawing on a little bit of experience, like with LEED build rating as it relates to light pollution control. And so with LEED buildings, you know, you can get different points for doing different things. And one of the I would say complaints, but observations from the light pollution side, particularly from quality lighting side, I can either spend a lot of money putting on some really great building lights, or I can put 2 bicycle racks, and they're both worth the same number of points towards my LEED rating scale. So I think the challenge here is are there some thresholds, like unless you meet this criteria, you cannot be rated at a bronze, silver, gold. So are there some minimal requirements that you'd have to meet from a astronomical impact perspective to get a sustainability rating, particularly as you go higher up, as opposed to a satellite operator? Well, I can't meet that. It's going to be too costly, but I'm going to do this, change out my propellant, and I'm getting to get my points, and I'm going to be planned and rated anyway. So I think that's the challenge there. And like, how do you factor that when everybody presumably wants their issue to be rated as one of the requirements?
Hey, Adrian from the Space Sustainability Rating. I think it's a very good point. And it's always a risk when you try to develop a single score indicator, is that you cannot have a very detailed impact assessment. So for example, recently we've been working on life cycle assessment for environmental impact, or like CO2 emission, ozone depletion, all that. And so LCA is a very, very detailed process, and you need a lot of information. And so what we did is that we studied the feasibility of doing a single score out of that, and the outcome was no. So, or let's say not no, but it's going to be challenging. And the reason for that is that by having this single score, sometimes the granularity of what you analyze. And so in a way, indeed, when we put too many models in the SSR, we need to be careful on how we tune the weights and where we set our priorities. So as of now, it's mainly space debris mitigation. Dark and gray skies, we're also trying to do that. I think a way to do this would actually to have different types of ratings. And for instance, if you rate different types of missions, and one rating might not, let's say, apply to a small sat, and maybe a large satellite would have a different rating, so that you can also have this impact assessment relevant to the category you want to rate. And maybe in the end, we'll develop this dark and gray skies module. It's not going to be a dark and gray skies module inside SSR. It's going to be a dark and gray skies rating that maybe astronomers will use. So as of now, we imagine it within the main SSR. But I think those questions of how much weight you want to put it, and not lose the granularity of your assessment, and maybe reward operators that actually doesn't care for dark and gray skies because they do everything by the books for collision avoidance, for instance, is discussion we need to have also with the astronomy community, with the SSA providers, satellite operators. So that I think those discussions are really important indeed.
My other concern is, the reason I asked if it would be sufficient for them to give you a fairly simple parametric model is that, we saw from David Galati's kind of approach, or, if you really want to assemble it from areas and BRDFs of materials and things like, it's very computationally expensive for you. And so, my general question is, how do we balance the trustworthiness of an operator in terms of what they submit versus the kind of expense of validation that you're doing to take the information they give you and produce what amounts to a visibility anyway? And so do we suggest to him, don't trust them, make them go down one level and give them some areas of this much Mylar and this much solar panel, or can they give him an integrated, validated model?
And Adrian again, and it's a very interesting discussion. And actually, I discussed with Siegfried like at the break right before that, because I wanted also to ask whether a diffuse model was precise enough, for instance, compared to precise BRDF. And one of the ideas that came during this discussion is that maybe you ask for a detailed model if they have it. If they have it, you do the detailed analysis and you get a good score. And you also incentivize them to do this analysis or BRDF, for instance. If they don't, you use a simpler model. However, you kind of bias the rating outcome to lower the score so that they are incentivized to do this analysis themselves so that you can have a better model. And you say, if you don't provide this information, we're doing a simplified analysis. However, you did not do this preliminary analysis so that we can have a detailed impact assessment. So your score will be lower. And that would be probably a solution. Now, regarding the trustworthiness of the information that is provided, I think inside the rating as of now, we also have this verification layer where we ask whether the information that is provided is either at an assertion level, supported by technical documentation, if the technical documentation is released, or if it's provided, if the information is verified by a third-party third-party authority or entity. So, for instance, for the orbital parameters or disposal, if necessary providers could verify this information, it's not only the satellite operators that provide us this information, then we do have a weight on that in the rating. So for every information that is provided, we have this verification assessment. So I think that's the way it works for now in the SSR. And I think this is also the way forward to really have trust in the information that's provided. I also wanted to add a point. So I think, so you mentioned the modeling aspects, and I think there are also very good qualitative criteria that should be taken into account. And for example, data sharing is one. So if from the astronomy community, it's not only about the modeling. So if there are best practices that are not, let's say, based on data, so more qualitative, I'd be also happy to include that and include this in the discussion for further definition.
That's really interesting. So you could give them some kind of numerical advantage if they promise to have positional predictions every 4 hours with good covariances as opposed to every 8 hours through space track. Or I mean, if they were going above and beyond with other criteria other than visibility, other than sunlight visibility and their radio quietness, that's an additional criterion for you. Yeah. So, and then picking up on what Ruhi said, do they get any reward in a re-rank if they get into orbit and it's validated that their model was as good or better than they claim, that their performance is as good or better than they claimed? Do they get a second bite at the apple for a re-rank?
Adrian, again, maybe I'll keep the mic and then pass. Yes, so the idea of the SSR is that so of course you can have more impacts if you rate a mission before it's launched, because you can change the design and drive requirements from an engineering perspective. However, there's also the operational aspect that can be taken into account. And so in that regard, what is foreseen with the SSR, it has a fixed validity period so that you need to reassess and monitor what the operators said they will implement. And so in that regard, a rating that is done during the manufacturing phase needs to be reevaluated once the mission is in orbit. And this echoes pretty much with what we discussed before about monitoring and have this periodical checks whether they improve their models, and from the models to the reality if there's a correlation.
Any other questions for Adrian about the SSR? Because this is going to be like the industry's lead rating or something. You know, they may take it very seriously, and so we better make sure that our set of criteria are in line with what we believe to be their best performance. So if you think about it and go to their website and look and have feedback, do you encourage an email to you to?
Yes. So we are very, very open, and also the methodology is quite open. So there are a lot of published papers, and you can read basically what's inside the rating very easily. And also from the astronomy community, when we develop those kinds of modules, it's useless if there's no endorsement from the astronomy community, or if there's no validation, let's say, of the technical stuff that is behind it. So it's going to be very important as well for us, once we get this more or less finalized, to really show the entirety of the code, the scripts, and the equations behind, so that the astronomy community can also have confidence that this modeling is accurate, and that it has a value also for them.
Great. Thank you. Okay, those of you who are optical observers know that sometimes some of your best observation is taken in the last half hour before morning twilight. So home stretch, but we can look at one more item. And so do you want to bring up that other document? So I gave you a rather abstract talk about the consolidated technical recommendations. I want to show you an example of what we really have at the moment. And I put the link in the Slack channel. By the way, if I gave everybody editor permission, it's because you're not the only ones who are sleepy. Please go to suggesting mode if you want to actually work on things, rather than having it open to the world. So, but what I want to ask now is not going line by line and getting every detail, but do we have the categories that we need to provide these technical recommendations when we're asked by, the EU or somebody, what is it, or Ashley, what is it that you guys really want in the way of limits? So I want to show the topics in the spreadsheet as much or more than the actual content. So we have, as usual, we lead off with seventh magnitude. So, but that's a good example of the information that we've got. So we've got a category, which is reflected sunlight limit. We've got a requirement stated both in astronomer terms and in engineering terms, because it's actually nanowatts per steradian that most engineers will actually want to measure. And we've got a rationale so that if you're asked, why is it that you set this limit and of what value is it to you as astronomers, we've got something brief and that can be elaborated on, I suspect. In some cases, we've got additional definitions because I assume that this is going to be aerospace engineers who look at this kind of story, and astronomical units are terrible to begin with. And so we need to explain a little bit, at least about our terminology. Can we, thank you. Every engineer we've talked to wants a tolerance on these limits. And so for the brightness limit, it's easy, except we have to decide what it is. But presumably, we would like that for every time we make a technical specification. But I'm open to, some of them are harder to do than others, as the radio astronomers will tell you. Can we keep pushing right? Okay. Provenance is just, this product is not new invention. This is taking those 4 documents, going through and extracting every recommendation, then sorting them by topic, then taking the ones that all said roughly the same thing and condensing those into a single line. And so in this case, you'll see, more than one report, but it just can point people back to their original references. Then what is new here is the next 2 categories, if we can skate a little bit farther. Okay. So we put in, if we were asking a policymaker to turn this into a licensing requirement, what do you say? And in the short term, before we get regulations of that sort, how do we actually move toward meeting that requirement? So again, this is an easy example. What is it that operators need to provide as a condition of licensing as regulation framework? And then short term, you heard loud and clear, they can't hit 7th magnitude yet. And so our suggestion is that there be some agreement with the relevant science agency in the country giving the license to validate that they're making best efforts to get to that limit. And then what else needs to be in a regulation like this? And so in the brightness case, green light is all very nice, but sunlight is broadband, and so are satellite reflective surfaces. And so there needs, and as you well know, the sensitivity of a CCD and a set of filters does not look like a sunlight spectrum. So in fact, that curve is not gray reflectivity over all wavelengths. And so they're looking for specifications at other colors as well. And we would love to over constrain their problems. So, so those are the sets of information that we have for each of the technical recommendations. Is this adequate? Is it too much? Is it, and so Ruskin.
So do I want to come back to the sort of best efforts and technical approaches, and again suggest that we be a little harder there, because what best efforts for the sort of Blue Walker 3? If you just keep making them larger and larger, you can make best technical efforts, and you're never going to demonstrate you probably have a path to compliance. So how do you balance the two of those? And as a second thought, I mean, is there a way in this to sort of point the way in terms of something around the cumulative piece? And again, I don't know how you do that, but it's a piece that I know is really important to the community. And so for, even if it's a placeholder around how you would start to estimate the cumulative impact that each individual satellite or constellation would have on the diffuse brightness.
And so Ashley's variation on that theme was, do we have an operational limit on the number of satellites that are so bright that all we can do is avoid their positions? So in other words, do we give a pass if Blue Walker in the end produced 75 satellites, and so there were a mere 75 brightest new stars in the sky that moved, would that be so minimally disruptive to our observing programs that that's tolerable? On top of their best efforts in going from 0th magnitude down to 3rd magnitude or something.
Every single one. I just say, unless you're able to look at the cumulative, how many Blue Walkers will come along? So unless you're able to say, yeah, that is an absolute limit. So otherwise, I think you would just end up in a slippery slope. Because the first one comes, it's just 75. Or the next one comes, oh, it's just 50. Oh, and the next one is just 10. And suddenly you got 200. And I don't know how much that would mean is in the sky. So it's like if you're looking at long term, unless you can look at the cumulative, you're going to have to just establish that limit. And I would suggest that on the short term is, if you can't meet it now, demonstrate how you are going to meet it within whatever a generation is. Like that's the promise of SpaceX. So let us launch these ones because our model is to iterate and improve, right? So show us how you're going to meet that limit within one life cycle, within 5 years or whatever it is, so that you give them the nod to get started, but you say, yeah, show us how you're going to do it.
And Ruhi, okay. Any online? Okay. Adrian.
Hello, Adrian again. I think that's very useful, and those are like the type of instrument that can then be used by space agency, for instance, if they want to really draw like ECSS standards from it, or I mean for Europe. What I would suggest having from an engineer perspective would be to have the validation method, or the how you test it actually. So you say you want to be fainter at 7 magnitude. Maybe at some point you want also to have like a substandard saying how you measure or you model this magnitude, and have a standardized way to do it, so that all operators, they know that they have either the tools or the same methodology to do it.
That's a very good point. So a sort of either a public or a uniform way. Any other thoughts on this kind of content? I sense a blood sugar low. Are there other things that you would like to talk about, or would you like to have a half-hour break? See, I got smiles. Okay, so any comments from folks online? Okay. This is incredibly valuable feedback. You've got a link if you want to go start looking at it now. suggesting mode, please, if I gave you too much permission. And otherwise, I'll be writing on both of these, on the position paper and on the requirements. They're a little more raw than the position paper, at least at the moment. But please do take a look, because both of these are in the end going to be IAU's position on this issue. And so we really want to have, you know, as much perspective from you as we can. And so I'll echo Connie's thanks for a fantastic meeting, and we're going to keep on fighting the good fight. So thanks, everybody.